Hello everyone, I'm Samar and I'm founder of Jugnu. So for those of you who don't know what Jugnu is a hyperlocal marketplace based out of India, and we provide on-demand transportation and delivery services, and we are the third largest on-demand company in India. And today I just want to talk about a few things about on-demand industry in general. We believe that on-demand is a new type of industry which has kind of, pretty much started in the last few years. And so I'll talk about what is so special and, what are the trends that have really, gotten this industry started. And then a little bit about technology that is supporting this, that is needed for any on-demand company to be created. And then I'll tell you a little bit about our story as Jugnu, as a company, and also what we feel future will be for on-demand industry and us as Jugnu. And I hope that some of the entrepreneurs in the room can start, can get inspired and from the story and start something of their own. So basically, the first trend that has really gotten the on-demand industry going up is that economies of scale used to be something that was a deterrent for small companies to start, right? So every big company was doing everything much more efficiently than smaller companies, right? The major reason was that for bigger companies, they did not have downtime, which means that utilization of resources or manpower was much more efficient than smaller companies, right? But with technology, that has actually become economy of arbitrage. So what it means is that even when people have downtime, it's actually possible to use those incremental downtimes using technology, and that is actually the major driving trend for on-demand economy and industries. So on the consumer side, the ownership model is fading away. So earlier, so we still have that kind of aspiration, at least a place where I come from, to own a house and to own a car. But that is slowly giving away, and people are moving to a economy where they prefer to consume things on demand rather than owning things. So this is another trend that is accelerating on-demand technologies and on-demand businesses, because young people want to move around, they don't want to tie themselves with anything, so they just want to consume stuff as and when they need. So finally, what's happening is digital platforms are emerging to connect both the supply and demand, which is present in a real-time basis. And these are basically companies like Jugnu, Uber, Airbnb, which are basically the on-demand companies. And second trend that has actually enabled this to happen is ambient computation, right? So it's just a fancy word for more smartphone penetration. But the idea is that 5 years ago, so if smartphones were fairly rare and very expensive, so to speak. But today, if you go to India, even a rickshaw puller or any low-income group people would typically have a smartphone, and this smartphone is location aware. It knows what time it is. So it's a very, very smart context-aware device. So what that does is that it enables this person, this owner of the smartphone, to not just consume information and be good at what he or she is doing, but also connects this person to a virtual workforce. So that is exactly so if you look at all the primary theme in any on-demand company is actually a smartphone that they give. So if you go to any emerging market, the first thing that any on-demand company does is buys a lot of smartphones, starts giving it to their so-called service providers. You might have seen that in Turkey, but in India, that's pretty much it. So smartphone companies also go to companies like us because they know we are driving smartphone penetration. So it's like it's a positive feedback loop where on-demand companies are starting because of more smartphone penetration, but they're in turn also increasing smartphone penetration. So this is actually helping a lot. So, and so now I want to talk a little bit about, if anybody wants to, start an on-demand company, like what are some of the steps that you should take about? Because we see that in the past few, years, pretty much, especially from Silicon Valley, almost anything that could be on demand has happened, has been built, and thankfully a lot of that has been shut down because people were not really thinking clearly. Like for example, kittens on demand to hug. So something like that, like crazy things coming up just because people could do something. They thought everything will be on demand. So hopefully this will kind of be a little more logical way of thinking for people who are thinking of starting their own on-demand companies. So first of all, I think the idea is that you need to discover a little bit about the market. So what I mean to say by that is that just look around what kind of so just start from the morning and go towards your evenings and see what is the kind of transactions you are doing every day. So in the morning you typically buy milk, buy cereal, bread, and then you take a taxi, and then you go to work and typically order food during lunchtime. So if you just chart this thing out, you will see that there are almost 5 or 10 big on-demand businesses there, food delivery, online cabs, and accommodation. So this is like basically the first step to look at things. But when you don't do this, and it's actually very obvious to think of it that yes, of course everybody would be doing this. But when you think about some of the businesses, they have actually not done this. So they just they wanted to be so different, and they forgot about this discovery process, and in the process created a business that really nobody wanted. So then the second thing is when you have discovered some behavior where there is transaction. So the second thing is you need to do validation, which means that a behavior is there, transactions are happening, scale is probably there or not, but is the intervention through technology logical or not? For example, you see some businesses, for example, this digital cash thing, right? A lot of places just push. So in India, very recently, just demonetized their whole currency, thinking that people have to go to digital transactions. While actually I support it, but at the same time, behavior did not change right away. Digital transactions increased, but the moment remonetization happened, digital transactions actually decreased again, right? So this has happened. If you look at last month's data, digital transactions went down again. But it may be a small nudge in the right direction, but the idea is that not every behavior needs intervention at the right space to change it, right? So you don't really need technology in everything. So this is the second step. What is the real value add you're actually bringing to that behavior? And finally, and third step is when you have these two, that this is a logical thing to be done, and there is a clear value add that technology is bringing, then you need to think about efficiency, right? Because a lot of businesses have actually done the two things right, and then they blew out of proportion and shut down. And if you look at Silicon Valley's or Indian startup stories as I follow, I mean, there's just too many on-demand companies shutting down. People feel that this is because on-demand as an industry doesn't make sense, but I think it's because people didn't really work on their efficiency, of the transactional, per transaction efficiency, and just scaled and because of that had to shut down. So this rat race where you thought, there was this thinking that let's just, corner market, efficiency will be taken care of later on. I think that has been proven wrong in the last few years, and a lot of companies have shut down. A lot of companies are on verge of shutting down. So the fact is, like, get efficiency first on a per transactional basis, and then go to scale. So finally, it is, once you have that efficiency figured out on a, transactional basis, then you just basically scale. That is more like, building a team and putting the right amount of capital into the business. So hopefully this chart will help some of the entrepreneurs here. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about, what are some of the components in an on-demand business from a technology perspective, right? So it's actually very easy to think of on-demand as a very, so I meet a lot of people, especially, enterprises. They say on-demand is a fad. It's not really an industry in itself, right? And I mean, to some extent, it is true, but I think there are some aspects of these kind of businesses which are very, very different, and these core technology components actually try to address that. So if you look at, an enterprise which thinks that, there is like no on-demand industry, you will see that there are some aspects which are inherently very, very different. So for example, aggregation, right? By aggregation, I mean, on-demand businesses inherently do not have, or ideally should not have, a captive workforce. They basically just aggregate people. Coming back to the time arbitrage model, when people are free, the trend is that people want, open-ended and flexible jobs. I want to do it for the next 1 hour, I do it. So that basically is called aggregation, right? You're just aggregating people, not really hiring people. And then there is a module or concept called scheduling, where people are able to choose when they work, how they work, how much time they work. So for example, a student who wants to make money wants to just drive taxi on a Friday night and a Saturday night, because he or she knows, that time they can make more money. And why work on a Monday morning when you can do the same amount of, spend the same amount of time and make much more money? So this is what, scheduling does. And then there is profiling. So from a company's perspective, right, earlier what would happen is, there would be an interview process, there would be a proper, screening process, and then somebody would be hired with the hope that he or she is going to be long-term in the business, in the company. But now that has changed from that to basically a profile being created. It's like you start with, typically on-demand companies don't really do a lot of screening in the beginning. Yes, there's some criminal background checks and stuff, but then a profile gets created according to the behavior of the individual. And this is basically takes into account the history. And so if you perform better, the platform rewards you. If you don't perform better, the platform basically, punishes you. So that's what profiling means. And finally, matching, this is very critical, because when a transaction happens in on-demand businesses, you typically have like, anywhere from 5 minutes to a half an hour window to complete the transaction. And it's very, very difficult. So, this becomes very important, matching the right person, right consumer to the right delivery provider. And finally, notifications are a basic thing, because people want intelligent and context-aware notifications. So, and then there is tracking. So even though, GPS have become very, very efficient, it still is the most, I would say, battery consuming and the troublesome of all the pieces. And finally, payments, this is very, very geo kind of specific. And finally, there's curation. So what happens, when transactions go wrong? How do you create that? How do you, what are the recourse for customers? So it is basically more like, so the idea of curation module is that you build the system in a way that it is self, so it's as a family, it's self-punishing or self-rewarding. So the community basically rewards or punishes the good people and bad people and improves itself. And finally, so now I'll talk a little bit about our story. So what is Jugnu, and how we started and what we are doing. So Jugnu is a hyperlocal marketplace, and as we think of ourselves, we are, a marketplace that connects people within consumers and merchants within a 3-mile radius, right? This 3-mile radius can be like, it can be 1 mile for some, auto rickshaw ride, or it can be 3 miles for a grocery